Welcome to this class on ADHD. We're going to talk about reversing ADHD. And of course, when we talk about ADHD, we're talking about a whole basket full of things. We're going to be talking about OCD, ODD, autism, learning disabilities, dyslexia. We're going to be talking about a lot of different brain developmental delay disorders. The big thing to keep in mind is that all of these are under the umbrella of brain developmental delays. I want to show you just a few statistics on ADHD, and then I want to talk very specifically how the brain develops and what you can do to help reverse this condition. First off, 32% of folks that are diagnosed with ADHD, will drop out of high school. The average rate is about 15%. There's 70 to 80% divorce rate in ADHD and autistic families. There's a 300% increased risk of substance abuse, 300% increased risk of dementia. Now here's the deal also. They find that in our prison systems, there's somewhere about 40% of folks that are incarcerated actually have ADHD. It's not the only reason why people are in prison, but certainly this is one of the very underlooked at things that actually drive this problem. In recidivism, which means you go to jail, you get out, and then you go back in. It's significantly higher in this group. So there's a whole lot of statistics that show that between about 20 to 25% of our children have at least one or more of some type of developmental delay that manifests into OCD, ODD, learning disability, ADHD, dyslexia, or autism, or whatnot. ADHD makes up about 10%. So that means 1 in 10 of our children have or are diagnosed with ADHD. These numbers are actually expanding. They're getting larger. This is actually going into what we would say even in the epidemic level, if you will. And so it's something we have to get a handle on. There's a lot of great things out there that's being done, but I will tell you at the end of the day, this is not going to get resolved until we understand the fundamental drivers. We have to understand how the brain develops. We have to understand what goes wrong and what can go right in these kids. I want to show you this stat. This comes from a study out of 2007, which is 13 years ago, and they found that the average family spends about $12,000 to $17,500 each year for a child with ADHD. That number is about $30,000 for autistic kids. Now this is not for quote-unquote medical care. These are just all the little extra things that you have to buy just to make things kind of work out. So, and these numbers are actually old. Most people, when they first see that, they'll say, oh, there's no way. But when you start getting your checkbook out and take a look, you'll find that you are actually spending probably more than you understand with this. It's really important, not just from the monetary, but that is important, but it's very important to get a hold of this condition. Boys who take ADHD drugs, this is ADHD drugs don't boost kids' grades. This came out of the Wall Street Journal from another study. But boys who took ADHD drugs actually performed worse in school than those with a similar number of symptoms who didn't. And girls taking the medication reported more emotional problems. So study finds ADHD drugs do more harm than good. There's of course a lot of studies out there that show the benefits of taking the drugs and so on and so forth. So I'm not just here trying to bash that. I just want to get the idea out that these don't come without consequence. And at the end of the day, here again, taking a drug, taking a chemical, trying to chemically alter the brain is not restoring normal brain function. It's not able to correct the wrongs of problems with development. White matter by diffusion MRI following methylphenidate. This is a very common drug used for ADHD. What they found that 4 months of treatment, actually there were specific tracts of brain white matter in boys with hyperactivity ADHD. Those actually laid down incorrectly. In this process, we do something in our office that I'm very proud of. We have developed a 5-prong approach to addressing ADHD. We work with all the other brain development delays as well. ADHD just happens to be the most common one that we see. We have developed a 5-prong approach, and I want to talk about each one of these prongs. Here are the prongs. We do hemispheric brain balancing. We do upper cervical chiropractic care. We do synchronization, which we'll talk about, inflammation, neurofeedback, we'll talk about these things. But first, I want to get to why do we have a brain? It's very interesting. Descartes, back in the 1600s sometime, he made a statement, and he said, I think, therefore I am. So now we understand that that's not exactly the full truth. Actually, the reason why we have a brain is so that we can move. We learned this from the sea squirt in the ocean. The sea squirt has a tail and has a brain. And it will, looks kind of like a tadpole. It'll go through the ocean, it'll land on a coral, land on a rock, and then it fixes itself on that rock. And once it no longer needs to move anymore because it's fixated on the rock, it autolyzes, self-eats its own brain. Very interesting concept. Once the sea squirt no longer needs to move, it actually gets rid of the brain, uses it for protein to feed its body. So when it comes down to it, we have a brain for one specific purpose. That is to move. Now you can say, what thing? I think, I socialize, I have emotions, I have all these things. Here's the deal. In the world of neurology, all of these things are called non-motor movement. When I say motor movement, I'm moving my arms, I'm moving my legs, I'm moving my body. When I say non-motor movement, I'm talking about things like thinking. I'm talking about cognition, social awareness, emotional regulation. These are all parts of movement within the brain. So the more complex the species, the more complex the movement becomes. The more complex the movement it is all depends on the complexity of the brain. So I move, therefore I am. If you look at this, there's some fantastic feats that can be seen in the physical body and how we move our body. So if you look at it though, as I said, how the brain moves is really intricate to our thinking, our emotional regulation, our social awareness, and so on and so forth. When we look at it, we're divided into a left brain and into a right brain. So we have a left brain and we have a right brain. So primarily, in a very general sense, this is a very general term, the left brain is what is called our approach side. It is what's going to approach. It's going to go for it. Our right side of the brain is our withdrawal side. So one side of the brain, we're going to withdraw, and the other side is going to promote approach. Whether that's thinking, emotion, moving your body, whatever that is. In general, we can say the left side of the brain is going to approach things, and the right side of the brain is going to withdraw. This is a very important concept when it comes down to it. Kids with ADHD, they have a weak right frontal lobe right in that area that allows them to withdraw from moving too much. Moving too much can look like you can't sit still. Johnny can't sit still. It can look like that. But it can also look like if you don't withdraw enough, you could have inappropriate social behavior. You could have inappropriate emotional regulation. You can have inappropriate ability to have patience to see something through. You have inability to do these things, and then we label this as ADHD. And then we give it some kind of treatment without realizing and recognizing that if the right side of the brain continues to stay weak, you really have not solved the problem. So the left side of the brain, that's where we get our analytical thinking, our logical thinking. This is where our language centers, 98% of the people have their language centers in the left side of the brain. This is where we get our ability to sequence from time events. The right side of the brain understands the experience. Just to give you an idea about this, you may recall 30 years ago in October, we did this and then we did that. That's the left brain that did that. And then your right brain said, and it felt great. The right brain is what carries the memory of the emotion, but it doesn't have the time frame. The right brain is what gives us the big picture. The right brain is what helps us socialize because it helps us read between the lines, so to speak. It helps us get the joke. It helps us know what somebody's saying in between the words. It's that nonverbal communication, and the right brain understands the big picture. Now, somebody can be really strong in the right brain, or they can be really strong in the left brain, but the best brains are the ones that are actually more balanced, because we don't want to be too much big picture, because we need some detail. We don't want so much patience we don't do anything. We need some approach side to move, but we also need to be regulated by some level of patience in being able to put this together. So here it goes. This is the first major point, besides the brain's purpose is to move, is this. ADHD, the most common reason is because you have an imbalanced brain. The right side of the brain is not functioning as strongly as the left side of the brain. Now some people will say, well, wait a second, you could have a weak both sides of the brain. You're absolutely right, you could have that, and that could lead that. But the most common cause of ADHD is going to be a right brain that's not able to hold the patience, not able to socially regulate, not able to emotionally regulate. So our 5-prong approach is all about balancing that so the right brain can catch up with the left brain, and we can have a balanced approach and withdrawal mechanism. So the first thing to understand when we go through the brain development is this. When you are first born, your brain is only about 25% of its normal volume. So you have 25% of your brain volume at birth. By the time you are 6 years old, if you look at this right here, by the time we hit 6 years old up here, the brain is actually 90% of its volume. There's an incredible amount of growth that takes place in the first 6 years of life. This is amazing, and I want to show you a very important principle as to why we have so much trouble with ADHD. Number one, let me get my pen out. I want to see if I can do this real well. We're going to make this the left side and this the right side, okay? The first 3 years of life, predominantly the right side of the brain is developing. The first 2 to 3 years of life is developing somewhere 20 to 40% more than the left side. So the right side of the brain is the first to really start laying down. What does the right side of the brain do? It's where we learn how to socialize. It's where we learn how to emotionally regulate. It's where we learn how to understand nonverbal communication. It's where we learn how to understand the big picture. If you think about it, when you're first born, you only have about 2,400 vision. In other words, what somebody normally could see with normal vision at 20 feet, what they could see at 400 feet, that's what the baby sees when they're first born. By the time you're 6 months old, it's about 20/40. But all you can see is big, you can't see details at that time. So the baby is going through, like when they're looking at mom and looking at the different things, they're only seeing kind of big pictures, they're not seeing details. By the way, incidentally, that's the reason why we recommend mothers, when you have a newborn, a month old, 2 months, 3 months old, or whatever, don't cut your hair in a very dramatic way, because believe it or not, your baby will begin to have problems recognizing you for a little bit because of the change, because they're seeing the big picture. Now, watch this. This is a very, very, very important concept. The first 2 to 3 years of life, we're not measuring on language. We're not measuring on the ability to time sequence. As a matter of fact, kids 2 to 3 years old, you don't have memory from that period of time. You're not supposed to, because that area of the brain's not actually developing. So, but what you are learning how to do, which is very important, you're learning how to get along in society. As an infant, that's the #1 job you have, is to learn how to get along in society, to be in community, to socialize, to understand these things. It's very interesting, and I want to share something with you. Because we're bipedal, meaning we walk on 2 legs, we're not 4-legged, we walk on 2 legs. Because of that, the pelvis is shaped in such a way that the opening is smaller, and therefore we have to have a smaller head when we come out through the birthing process. But it's also very important because the first 3 years of life, we're learning how to socialize and how to be good in community, and we need this, and that's the reason why the time frame of development, in other words, the time frame of dependency for the human system is longer than any other species. What does that mean? That means that we have to have somebody taking care of us that first 2 to 3 years of life. We can't take care of ourselves. So we have the longest level of dependency. Somewhere, girls are somewhere about 2.5, 3 years, and I've heard that men are somewhere about 28 to 30 years. And if you thought that was a joke, I was just kidding. But actually, males are a little bit slower in that. So, but anyway, so we have this massive time frame of dependency where we have to have that. Guess what? That's for purpose, because the complexities of life, the complexities of our brain, the complexities of social awareness, the complexity of emotional awareness or emotional regulation is higher in the human than in other species. So we need that time for the right brain to develop. Guess what happens if a child, their brain is not developing well or it's behind in this area? You guessed it. These are the kids that wind up with ADHD, OCD, ODD, and even autism. Because what's happened is the right brain did not lay down as it should, and therefore, when the child turns about 2.5 to 3 years old, we start noticing things. Now the left brain starts kicking in. When the left brain starts kicking in, now the language starts taking off. Now they start being able to sequence better. They start determining between left and right hand. All these different things start happening as the left brain actually comes on board. I know we have parents that'll come into our office and they'll say, man, I tell you what, Johnny is so smart. When he was 1.5 years old, he could read road signs. And to me, that's terrible. That's not good. Why is that not good? Not because Johnny doesn't have a smart left brain, and he's even going to maybe look smart in school if it's not too far unbalanced, because the left brain is our academic side. But what happened to the right brain development? When he's 1.5 years old, he shouldn't be developing that left brain, and he shouldn't be reading road signs. He should be learning how to socialize, how to read between the lines, how to be normal, so to speak, a balanced approach in society. So this is kind of the long and the short. I do need to show you one more thing about the brain development, then I'm going to get into the 5 prongs that we actually do in our clinic. Okay, so let's talk about how the brain grows. It's a very important concept. First off, we have the brain sits here like this, and we have the nose and the mouth, and we have the brain stem. Now, there's 2 things that really provide what the brain needs for growth. Number 1, we have to have experience. We have to have an experience. What's an experience? That's seeing something, that's smelling something, that's hearing something, tasting, touching something, anything through our 5 senses. We have to have that experience, but we also have to have power to make that go together. Where do we get power? Gravity. Gravity exerts pressure on our muscles, primarily our core muscles, and when gravity acts on those core muscles, it causes them to build tone. And when the muscles have tone, they will, and here's a drawing of a muscle, the muscle with tone will send power right into the brain. So then, when little Johnny sees something in his eyes, it comes back here, and it's genetically programmed to the back of the brain for brain cells to come alive when Johnny sees light, colors, and when Johnny has power coming up from the gravity. There's 2 things. Now, the first concept, they've actually taken cats and done this study. If you blindfold a cat, this is what they did in their study, and the first 6 months, the cat will be blind for the rest of its life. I think that kind of makes sense, because in the first 6 months, if they have a blindfold over and they haven't had any of the experience of lights and colors and such, they're not going to develop these brain cells. And if you don't develop in a certain time frame, you lose it. You don't get it. But here's the thing that's even more interesting to me. They took another set of cats and they did not let their paws touch the ground for 6 months. Guess what? These cats did not develop vision either. and they were blind. And the reason why was because it's not just the experience you need, you also need the power from gravity exerting its force on our muscle spindles, having some tonicity that's sending power right up to the brain. These two things have to come together in order for the brain to grow. So then we have this situation down here in this part of the brain. This is where we get our auditory. Up here, this is where we get our ability to know where our body is in space and time. This portion right here, this is where we move our body. This portion right here, this is where we begin to build our ability to think. And down here, this is where our orbital frontal is. This is where the magic happens. The orbital frontal cortex is where we learn how to socialize and we learn how to emotionally regulate. Now, I want to draw a very quick picture because that was kind of a mess there. I want to show you something. This is called the frontal lobe right here. All movement happens in this frontal lobe. That's what all movement, motor and non-motor. The very first thing that happens in the baby is the back part of the frontal cortex. That's where you start learning how to move your arms and your hands and your feet, your legs, and so forth. Just north of that, we develop a part of the frontal lobe called the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex. That's where we get our ability to think. That's where we get our ability to do what's called executive function, our ability to run our life. That's the next thing that develops. The last thing that happens in this development trail is down in that orbital frontal, and that's where we learn how to socialize. That's where we learn how to have emotional regulation. This is the area that has the biggest problems when we're dealing with ADHD. The right side, orbital frontal, is not developing properly, and it's delayed in its development, and the child doesn't have patience like they should. They don't have the ability to emotionally regulate, and they don't have the ability to socialize as what would be considered normal. So let's go through the 5-prong approach that we do. First, we actually develop what are called brain exercises. That's right. The left side of the body will actually activate the right side of the brain. The right side of the body will activate the left side of the brain. So we develop exercises very specifically for your child, whatever they need. We'll go through and do a series of exercises to help bring that up. So we want to first identify the strong versus the weak hemisphere, because we don't want to strengthen the strong hemisphere, we want to strengthen the weakest hemisphere. So as we said, there's a right and left side of the brain. If you would like, put in the comment section in this Facebook Live, and we will send you out these two forms. These two forms are what are called the cognitive style profile and the brain balance profile. I don't know if you can see it from your Facebook Live, but basically what it shows, this side right here, let me get my black pen out, this side right here, you're going to scratch. Is your child analytical, good with details, kind of slightly OCD, very literal, very logical, prefer to be alone, not great at reading people? This is somebody that has more of a dominant left side of the brain. On the other hand, if you check through here and they're very social, intuitive, they get bored easily, they hate details, they like fashion, good common sense, poor memory for facts, details, sequencing, and that kind of thing, then they're probably more right brain strong. Now, if your child, you get a bunch of check marks like this, you'd say, oh, your child probably has a more right dominant, a right hemisphere dominance. Now, if your child looks like this, then that can be that was something that has to be further evaluated in the physical exam. Moving on to this one, brain balance profile. Now, watch this. If you scratch these over here, this is related to poor memory, dyslexia, depressed, worry a lot, hyper aware of what others think. This is somebody that has more of a weakness in the left brain, whereas if you do this one, poor attention, hyperactive, can't shut down at night, social anxiety, autoimmune, impulsive, all these things we talk about overly literal. This is somebody who has a weak right brain. So this would be a very nice little take-home thing that you can go do at home. You can also look in doing a physical exam. This is what we do in our office. I'm just going to show you a small part of this because of the time frame. But you will find, in general, you can't say this 100%, but in general, the head will tilt towards the weak side. About 70-80% of the cases, the head will tilt to the weak side. So if my head's tilting over here to the right, then that would mean right weak brain. Now it's very interesting, if you look at this from Time magazine right here, and they show an autism case right here, what I find very fascinating is if you look at that case, look which way his head's tilted. Now Facebook Live, sometimes left, right, left, but this child has a right head tilt. That means right weak brain. That's very consistent with autism. If you have an eye that's more open on one side than the other, that means you have a weakness in the facial muscles on that side, and that could mean you have a weakness in the brainstem on that level. Also something we look at is called the Nasolabial Line, which is the smile line. Sometimes in some people it's more defined on one side or the other. On the side that is less defined, that would be the weaker side. So looking at this right here, you can see how that smile line right there. So we see a lot of different things. These are some of the things we look at when you bring your child into the office. Now, I want to show you something really important. And it goes like this. All right, so when the brain builds, there's a very specific way it builds, and this is how we tailor our examination. The very first thing is the postural system. The postural system, I just talked about the core muscles, feeding into the brain, giving it power to grow. The postural muscles are the first thing that develop what's called the vestibular system. The vestibular system is where your brain knows where your body is. It gives us balance, it gives us coordination, orientation, where we're at. So the vestibular system gives us balance. Well, the vestibular system actually builds what are called the eye movements. And then once the eye movements are developed, that's how the cortex develops. Now, let me back up and say it this way. Let me go here. So the very first system that actually develops in developing the brain, first we have the experience, but the postural system. But the postural system is developing the balance system. Think about it. The first thing a baby does is they look up and they start developing that cervical curve. Well, as they're doing that, they're building postural muscles. When they're building those postural muscles, they're beginning to move. Now, the brain has to know where they're at, so you start building that center that helps you know where you're at. So you know where you're at. Now, once you know where you're at, now you have to move your eyes to see where you're going. Remember, the purpose of the brain is for movement. So first, we begin the movement, then the brain knows where we're at, then the eyes can look and see where we're going, and once we build those, the eye movements, then the cortex actually, a big deal out of this, because of this. And this is the take home, this is the most important piece of this, and that's this. If you have a problem with your postural system, if you have a problem with your balance or your vestibular system, if you have a problem with your eyes, how they move, you're going to have a problem with the way the cortex lays down. No matter what kind of medication somebody takes, what kind of herbs they take, what kind of special things they do, if there's a problem going up the chain of that bottom-up development of the brain will never be able to lay down properly. So these things have to be addressed. So what do? When a child comes in, we're going to check the posture. This is so funny. We'll have kids that are in Little League, in football, very active, and sports and so on and so forth. We'll lay them on the table and they have very, very poor postural strength. Sure, their arms are strong, their legs are strong, but they have lousy core strength, and it's the core strength that builds the brain, not the arms and the legs. It's the core strength. So the first thing we do is evaluate our kids to look at their posture, their postural muscles. The next thing we'll do is basic things like put their feet together and close their eyes. have them stand with one leg. We'll do different balance things to see what the balance is doing. If they have a problem with balance, we have to do some things that will help that. And then we'll do things like have them follow our fingers with our eyes to see how their eyes move. If it starts doing this kind of funny thing, or whatever case, that shows us eye movements are off, and we have to get those stabilized before the brain can actually develop. So the very first thing we do is we develop brain-based exercise based upon this examination. I thought this was interesting. Too little tummy time for infants may risk developmental delays. So it says, we have seen firsthand that a lack of tummy time. What are babies doing when they do tummy time? Right? They're on their belly, they're looking up, they're developing postural core strength. So firsthand from lack of tummy time can mean for a baby developmental, cognitive, and organizational skills, delays, eye tracking problems, what did we just say about eye tracking, and behavioral issues, to name just a few complications. Here's a test you can do at home. If you have a child that's 6 months old, there's something called a head lag test, and it's done just like this. You lay them on a bench, just like this, and you're holding like this, and you pull them up towards you. When they're 6 months old, they should be able to hold their head all the way up as they come up. They shouldn't have what's called a head lag as they come up. If they have a head lag, that means the postural muscles are not strong enough, and guess what? If the postural muscles are not strong enough, that brain is not laying down as it should. In fact, this is a risk factor for autism. This is one of the exams we do. We do a lot of exams on infants, well baby checks. We do all that to keep the babies healthy, and also to make sure that they're developing on time and all these things. That definitely is a test that I do in the office to check. All brain developmental issues start with strengthening the core that activates the brain. Here's something we'll do, and we go through this in the office. We do different core exercises. Now, I thought this was actually kind of funny. This is a picture from 1906, a playground in 1906. Now, something between what they were doing in 1906 and what we're doing right now would probably be just fine. Somewhere in between that would actually be good. This is actually this is something I like to do with my kids. I have them out in the backyard doing box jumps. I like to have them. Just like that. Can you hear that? Mm-hmm. 46 to go, buddy. 5. What? That's 5. That's 5. Okay, so yes, I have my kids out there doing that. I like to have them on the trampoline, moving, and you have babies experiencing colors, experiencing taste, experiencing sounds. We need to have our children having all kinds of experiences, and keep in mind, it is the changing of experiences that counts. The changing in foods we eat. We don't eat the same foods every day. We don't smell the same things every day. We don't see the same things every day. We move our bodies. We're active. We do trampoline. I put obstacle courses back in the backyard and have my kids do that. Have them doing box jumps. I want them moving their bodies. This is all a part of this. One of the things I have kids do that come in here, I have them doing push-ups and sit-ups, just very basic things. Upper cervical care, I began upper cervical care about 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago, and there's a lot of very key things to upper cervical, and I'll go over just a few. Number one is that how the head is sitting on the spine has a lot to do with how the brain is going to function in this matter. When you look at the base of the brain, or the base of the skull right here, in this area you have a whole bunch of muscle fibers. These muscle fibers are rich in muscle spindles. These muscle spindles are very powerful and going into the brain to help provide the power for the brain and the experience to help them grow. This is an experiment or study done by a doctor in Germany, Dr. Biedermann, and he did a study on about 600 kids, and he found that if the upper cervical area, if the head was off position, that it led to developmental delays and a whole bunch of other things. But this is something we will check the children to make sure, because sometimes through the delivery process, the head can be off just a little bit. It's very gentle carry, very easy to do. In cases, it can make a very profound difference. The third thing we do is called synchronization. I need to take a moment. I've talked about a lot of things, and if this is your first rodeo, you've never heard any of this before, it probably feels like I'm just shooting you with a fire hose. I apologize for this. We are going to make this video available. You can watch it again. I've already downloaded a tremendous amount of information. If you're catching up with me, if you're with me, congratulations, that's great. It's not because I'm so smart. I'm not trying to imply that. I'm just saying that this is a lot of information to chew on. I want to explain something that is very important. I would not take you through the pain of learning this if it was not very, very important in understanding developmental delays. So here's my left brain and my right brain, right here, okay? So the right side of the body's muscle spindles feed into the base of the brain, and then that goes to the left brain, and that gives it power to take the experience to develop whatever area the brain's going to develop. Same thing happens on the left side of the body, goes to the right side of the brain. So we have to have that. Now the brain goes through something, has something called wavelengths, and you've probably heard of that before. You have wavelengths in the brain. It can be measured in what are called hertz. Let me explain what that means. If you say that this portion of my brain is humming along at 40 hertz, what that means is this. The brain is turning on and off 40 times a second. That's right. The brain turns on and off 40 times a second if you have 40 hertz. Now, we do this because there's this grand principle in all life, and that's this, that there's a conservation of energy. Conservation of energy. What does that dictate? We're going to do whatever we can do to conserve energy at any place. How's the best way to conserve energy? Turn that brain on and off multiple times a second, and that way it's not on 24/7. So if you have 20 hertz, 20 times 5 hertz, or whatever the case may be. Now, given that example, when we say hertz, we're talking about oscillations. I'll give you an example here. Okay, so let's say that right there in my example is 40 hertz or 40 oscillations. It's not. I see that I don't have 40 bumps here. But let's say that this one is, well, let's just make this one 10, and we'll make this one 10 here, and we'll make this one 2 down here. All right, so these are 2 oscillation patterns. So this one up here would be 10 hertz if there's 10 lines there. And this one down here would be 2 hertz. I want to explain something very, very, very important. Pay attention. This is really important. Okay, so when the brain is down here, it's all the way off. You have no perception of anything. A nuclear bomb could go off inside your left ear, and if it happened in that split second that you're down there, you would have no awareness of it because you have nothing going on, nada, zero. Lights are turned off. It is only when we reach this peak up here that the brain turns on. Now, depending on the excitement level and so on and so forth, this bar may go up and down. But just as a principle, you have to get up over that peak before you have awareness of what you just saw, heard, thought, felt, tasted, touched, anything from your 5 senses or any awareness from anything. And here's what happens. Somebody's talking to you. I'm talking to you right now. You're watching. You're seeing the video, so you actually see it with your eyes. You're hearing it with your ears, and also there's an emotion that's wrapped around how you're feeling when you're doing it. There's a smell in your room. There's all kinds of things that are going on. Every piece of bit of information is going to land on each one of these peaks. And what your brain is going to do, it's going to take that peak right there and it's going to send it to a place called the hypothalamus, where we convert it into short-term memory. Then that one goes to short-term memory, short-term memory, short-term memory, short-term memory. Then the hippocampus, if it's emotionally charged enough for you, or if it's important enough to you, or your brain thinks it's important enough to you, then your hippocampus will begin taking that short-term memory and converting it and consolidating it into long-term memory. Then 2 years from now, somebody comes up and says, hey, do you know anything about the hertz in the brain? You go back to your hippocampus picks out those bits of information and says, oh yeah, Dr. Kessinger talking about it on Facebook Live on April 23rd. He talked about how when it was at the peaks, there were all these bits of information landed there, and that's how I knew that. I'm making a silly out of that, but I'm just saying that's how you do that. Here's the point I want to make. If the left side of your brain is working stronger, you're going to have higher oscillation rate going on that side in general than you will in the right side. This side right here, somebody can be talking to you and you could be missing a whole bunch of what they're saying because your brain is off longer periods of time. Because it's off longer periods of time, you miss things. And guess what happens? If I say something to you, if you hear something, if you see something, you're going to process it in your brain. If your left side is oscillating a lot faster than your right side, guess which side you're going to, which side you're going to analyze that information from. You're going to analyze it from the left brain, not the right side. And then all of a sudden, guess what? You don't have patience. You don't have emotional regulation. You don't have social awareness. You don't have the ability to see the big picture. You can get fixated on a detail. You can get fixated on an idea. And that's how it happens, right there. So it's very interesting. There's something called Neuro Synchrony. Synchrony is timing. And the left and the right side of the brain, as I said, they oscillate at different speeds. And one of the things we use in our clinic is this. It's called an interactive metronome. And what it is a piece of equipment that looks like this. This is on the interactive metronome. So if you watch, she's clapping along with the beat. If she's way off, it goes red. If she's good, it goes green. Yellow's a little bit off. See that? Green, yellow. So what happens over time of doing this interactive metronome, you will actually train yourself. Your brain will train to get in the proper timing, and then the oscillation rates will begin to match each other. And as they do that, that's a very powerful way to get that right brain in sync with the left brain. We use this. It's been a fantastic addition to our tools. There's normative data, so if your child is 6 years old or 7 years old, we can do it on 4-year-olds. But if your child is whatever age they are, we can see how many milliseconds they're away from the beat, and it shows us where they're at with their timing. And then after doing 10 or 20 of these sessions, we can come back and look again and we'll see if that timing has improved. This is a white paper that was actually put out by Harvard, and this is the person that I learned from. Dr. Rob Melillo has developed a method using the brain balance stuff I just talked about. He also, in this study, they used interactive metronome and brain balance exercises. That's what we've talked about so far. But according to the Harvard Medical School, they found statistically significant changes in ADHD. In fact, one of the things that they found out was through doing this method, it was the only method so far that they've seen that actually shows changes in the brain that are consistent with improvements with brain development. These are very important. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be inflammation. Inflammation, inflammation, inflammation. Now, I have to explain something, and I'll do my absolute best to do it. I'm going to have to draw you a word picture. But what happens is when a tree is growing, if you want to have a really healthy tree, you need to prune it at times so that you can get rid of things you don't need so the tree can grow out and sprout out even healthier. The brain does that very same thing. The brain is like a tree. Between 0 to about 5 years old, there are about 10 to 12 what are called regression points in development. And what that means is this. 18 months is a common one. At 18 months, the child has 5 words. They're able to walk, and their balance is getting quite a bit better than it was just 6 months before. You'll find a week or two where they're kind of stumbling around a little bit more. Maybe they lost 1 or 2 of their words. They're having more problems with discipline. They're having more trouble, behaviors and so on and so forth. About a week or 2 and it goes away. What's happening is you have a very particular part of your immune system, and I'll talk about it just in a moment. You have a very particular part of your immune system that goes through the brain, and at specific times, it will chew up things that are no longer necessary. And so you can build better networks for higher complexity of brain function. So in other words, the brain is going to develop itself for where you're at right now. But as you become more complex, the brain has to become more complex. And part of making this work, you have to prune the tree so it can grow. That happens about 10 to 12 times the first 5 years of life. It's called synaptic pruning. Synapse, that's how the brain cells are communicating with each other. I want to introduce you to a cell in the body, that's in the brain, that's called the microglia. It's important. I wouldn't take you through the pain of learning a new word like that if it weren't important. It's called the microglia. This is a macrophage, or it's a white blood cell. It's the immune system in the brain. But it's much more than just your garden variety immune system cell. In fact, this microglia cell will go through, if it sees inflammation, it'll stomp it out. If it sees a toxin, it'll get rid of it. But it also does this. It will look at a developing neuron and it will encourage it to develop properly. It will encourage it to talk to other neurons. It'll encourage the whole development of the brain. So the microglia are very important. But guess what else they do? They are the primary cell that takes care of the pruning. So they actually will gobble up neurons you no longer need, connections you no longer need, so you can build more complexity in the brain. A study came out about 3 or 4 years ago that demonstrated that when these microglia white blood cells are primed, which means they're in an aggravated state, when they're in an aggravated state and something else ticks them off, gets them mad, there are a few areas that they will actually attack. And guess which area they attack? You guessed it. It's the orbital-frontal area. So the microglial cells, if they're primed, they're already ticked off, and then you're sensitive to gluten and you eat it, or you're exposed to something that causes an upregulation of your inflammatory process, you have a viral infection, or you have something going on like this, what happens is this: the microglial cells will begin to upregulate. They'll do too much, and they will actually do too much pruning. And when they do too much pruning, they can actually affect, in a negative way, those very areas that are regulating attention, regulating patience, regulating emotional awareness or social awareness, and emotional regulation. These are called the microglial cells. Attention deficit hyper disorder and inflammation, what does the current knowledge tell us? When activated, the microglia produce more pro-inflammatory cytokines. These are chemicals that come off the white blood cells that tell all the rest of the white blood cells there's a fight, come and do it. So in turn, they promote activation of the microglia, resulting in inflammatory flow that further contributes to neuroinflammation, brain inflammation, and theoretically to the pathophysiology of ADHD. The number one cause of inflammation, from my experience of years of doing this, the number one cause of inflammation in the child's body by far is food sensitivities, not allergies. If you eat a food you're allergic to, you can eat it, your tongue can swell up, your windpipe kind of closes down, maybe your ear itches, you get a red face, you get rashes. These are allergies. This is not an allergy. These are food sensitivities. I want to go into this just a little bit. We only have about 10 minutes left, so I will keep that in mind. But what we have in the gut, we have one cell lining. Here's where the food is coming through, and here's where it's getting into the body and going into the liver so it can be processed. You have about 60 to 80% of your whole immune system in your body at any given time right here in the gut for the very purpose to make sure that you don't have bad things coming in. If, lead, BPA plastic, viruses, bacteria, whatever the case may be, you have to have a barrier system keeping it from getting into your system, because if you don't, it's bad news bears. You get bad stuff into your system, it'll take you out and take you out quickly. So the immune system is there as a protection. The problem with it is this. I'll just give an example. Gluten is not the only thing. But between these cells, you have what are called tight junctions. These In these cells, you have something called tight junctions. Tight junctions are what are in between these cells. Did you ever play Red Rover as a kid? I'm willing to bet there's a good possibility you did. When you did, you locked arms together and somebody couldn't come through. Well, you don't want food that's not completely digested going through, because even, like take broccoli. Organic broccoli is one of the better foods. Kale, organic kale, one of the better foods you can have. But if you find that it's undigested and it's sitting down here, it's bad because it's not supposed to be there, right? So Red Rover, if it can be from antibiotics, it can be from stress. There's a whole bunch of things that can actually open up those tight junctions, and Red Rover no longer has the ability, and then things come right through. When they do, white blood cells will look at them and say, you're not supposed to be here, and they will tag them, and it will upregulate the immune system. Guess what? The gut is completely connected to the brain. If your gut is inflamed, guess what? Your brain is inflamed. It goes together. You can't help it. You can't have one without the other. We have what's called a gut-brain axis, and it's very interesting. They're two separate organ systems, if you will, but they're so intimately connected. We even have neurons, brain cell-looking things, in our gut that looks just like what we have in the base of our brain. So there's a connection between the gut and the brain. So when you have issues in the gut, you will have issues in the brain. So we get leaky gut. It causes inflammation, inflammatory response, which causes it to regulate throughout the whole body. I want to show you this right here. You may not have this. If you don't have this, it doesn't mean you're not gluten sensitive, but your pinky should actually come up to that finger. You see how short that pinky is there? This pinky should be coming to that line. So you can check it on yourself. Look and see if your pinky, okay, get back to class now. See, your pinky is sitting up here. If it's lower than that, then you are either celiac disease or a gluten sensitivity. Maybe you're not celiac, but you're a gluten sensitivity or very high potential of that. So if you see that, by the way, gluten sensitivity is not the only food sensitivity. And not only that, if you are gluten sensitive and you've eaten gluten over a lifetime, then you're sensitive to a whole bunch of other stuff because you've broken down those gut barriers, Red Rover, and everything's come through. Here's just some more pictures of that. I wanted to give you an example. This is not of a ADHD case, but I just wanted to show you the power of what goes on with these food sensitivities. This was a teacher that came to see us from Arkansas. She had actually consulted a number of doctors, 3 dermatologists, 2 allergists, no OBGYN. Not saying that to brag, but I just want to show you what her journey was. And when she first came in, that is what her skin looked like. And it looked like they had different parts of her body, but this was the main part. When she came in, she had actually already done food sensitivity somewhere, and she'd done other things. Unfortunately, I don't trust a lot of the food sensitivity labs out there. They're not as well regulated, and you may not get the accuracy by doing that. There's actually 2 labs that I trust for food sensitivities, and we use one of those. I've done nearly 2,000 of those tests in the last 15 to 20 years, and I can tell you it is spot on, and so I trust it clinically with everything. So she came in and she found out that she'd already gone gluten and dairy free, and it didn't work. Something very important. Didn't show that she was sensitive to almond milk. So instead of drinking milk, she was drinking almond milk every day without knowing that she was just as sensitive to that as she was the other. And this was about 4 to 6 weeks in right here. And I believe this is 3 or 4 months into the process. So quite a big change. Now, this is not just the one case we have. I have multitudes of these types of cases that we've shown from food sensitivities. Now, when you have gut inflammation, it can go to the brain, it can go to the skin. These are the 2 most common areas it goes. I'm showing you this because I can't show you somebody who's depressed and then they said they felt better because you can't really see it. I'm showing you the skin because it is more noticeable. Here's association of attention deficit disorder and celiac. Just more things about that. Here's the deal. If you have a child, let me just say it this way. If you have a child with ADHD, autism, OCD, ODD, just any of these, you must get a food sensitivity test done. That right there, you can do all these other things, but if you're not getting at the inflammation in the brain, you're really not going to get to where you need to be. You must do food sensitivity testing. We offer that right here in the clinic, and we've seen lives dramatically change just from the food sensitivities. By the way, you maybe not ADHD, but maybe you have some issues. Maybe you're 40, 50 years old, and you're wondering what's going on. Think there's inflammation in your gut. That's a great place to start. The last thing I'll talk about is actually neurofeedback. Neurofeedback is a way for us to help retrain the brain. Now, I'm going to have Dr. Mariah. She's been sitting in the wings watching and encouraging me. She's my audience of one over here. I want her to come over here and talk a little bit about the neurofeedback.
So neurofeedback. You know, Dr. Rob was talking earlier about brain waves and the different hertz of the brain. We have a way of actually checking that with what's called a brain map. This is a functional EEG. It's called a QEEG. And we are able to actually read what the brain waves are doing in all the different areas of the brain and compare left to right, front to back, and that gives us certain patterns of how the brain waves may not be balanced the way that they should. And then through a process of neurofeedback, we can retrain those brain waves in a very painless, very fun way for these kids. Actually will help their brain be in better balance. So they'll come in, they'll watch a video of the parents choosing, and while they sit in front of the computer watching that video, the lights, the sound, the glasses that are flashing, all of that is altering the way that the brain waves are working to bring balance to where there may have been an imbalance. So it's super pain-free, super fun, kids love it, and it works very well.
Yeah, and I want you to stay up here if you don't mind. Here's a couple things. I really want to say this is more kind of getting into the wrap-up of this, but the neurofeedback is really working on the cortex. It's working on the brain. But if the child has poor posture, if they have poor postural core system, eye movements, and you try to do the neurofeedback, you're not going to get the results. If your child has food sensitivities and their brain is inflamed and you're trying to do the neurofeedback, it's not going to really work. If you're just doing the interactive metronome, you may get some benefit of that, but if you don't do the full thing together, you just simply don't. See, we've developed this program to hit every aspect, and if you will, the neurofeedback's the cherry on the top.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay, so I wanted to ask you one more question up here. We had a couple of kids here. We have a few testimonies. We could go through the testimonies.
That's mileage. Okay, so Darius first came in. What kind of issues was he having?
Brain
You're good. You're good.
His behavior is just in school mainly was the
Right. Yes. Okay. And so, tell us about the latest thing at your parent-teacher conference.
the parent-teacher meeting last night went really well.
Yes.
The teacher was super excited about how his grades have improved
Right.
and how his behavior had improved since the first part of school.
Okay, so I just want to say, because I want you up here, Dr. Mariah, this is one of the things we commonly see.
Yes, it's so much fun, especially when we see the parent-teacher conferences come around, that the parents and the kids and the teachers all can see the difference in their behavior,
It's really,
in their
really
academics, all of it. So much fun.
This is a child that you know, that this is, I want to show you, this is another skin thing, but what happened in this child is this child had a virus.
Absolutely.
And so we got a hold of the virus, we did food sensitivities, but I just want to show you that viruses and inflammation from food sensitivities need to be checked. Tell us a little about this one. You know who this one is? This was this one.
Yes, little Randall. This is a super awesome little child that came in that was really struggling with behavior issues at home and at school, to the point where they were really wanting to consider if they needed to use a medication. They brought this child in. We did everything we just talked about. We did neurofeedback, we did food sensitivities, we did interactive metronome, and he got the top tiger award at school this last quarter.
Now what was really cool is the principal and the administration or his teacher, they all came to his house and gave him this award because he had so dramatically improved in his behavior. And you know what? These parents did exceptional because they went through everything, they did everything, they followed everything to a T. Perfect, parents in doing that, they got a really good result. This girl right here was somebody that came to see us. When she first came to see us, the first visit took 2 hours. Now, before you say, oh my goodness, I can't go there, I can't go 2 hours for the kid, can you imagine? No, the first hour and 45 to 50 minutes, the child was in their car with the mom trying to coax her out. She had developed OCD. She had developed phobias. She couldn't be around people. She couldn't leave her mom's side 24/7. They had to take her out of the school system. She had to sleep beside her mother 24/7. She was under care for about a month and a half, 2 months, and she was able to the first time spend the night with her grandmother, and then about 6 months to 9 months later, she just did wonderfully well, came back to a normal life. It was wonderful, and this is my girl right here. And so yeah, if you would like to contact us and ask us about this program, you can call our clinic at 573-341-8292, or you can get us live. You can talk to us, message us with Kessinger Health and Wellness, or you can actually send an email. I'm giving Mariah's number out. You send an email to mariah@drkessinger.com. I thank you so much for watching this. This has been a great deal of fun doing this. Share this video, get this word out, because there's help that can be had for these children. Thank you.